afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Happy New Year. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo's virtual meeting, featuring Lou Hebert, award-winning writer and reporter. But first, let's have past President Chuck Mann deliver the reflection and Dennis Sherry lead us as we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
A few thoughts about New Year's Eve. Advice from Taylor Duval. This year, be structured enough for success and achievement and flexible enough for creativity and fun. Most years we stay up to see the new year in. This year we waited up to make sure the old one left. And this from songwriter Cy Coleman and Frank Sinatra, the best is yet to come. Dear Lord, in this new year, please give me a few friends who understand me and remain my friends. Work to do which really, I apologize. Work to do which has real value and without which the world would be poorer. A mind unafraid to travel, even though the trail be not blazed. An understanding heart, a sense of humor, time for quiet, silent meditation, the ability to feel the presence of God, and the patience to wait for the coming of these things with the wisdom to recognize them when they arrive. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Dennis. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Bright View Health as our January monthly meeting sponsor. Thank you, Rotarian Jean Dries. A couple of quick updates. Habitat for Humanity dedicated the house we worked on to a new homeowner. Thanks to all who worked on that house. For me, it was a very rewarding experience. And thanks to Kurt Church for your diligence in scheduling Rotarians to work on the project. This was a vocational service initiative started last fall, and we were so glad to be involved with other surrounding Rotary clubs. Next week, we'll show a short video on the dedication. Also, I want to congratulate Kendra Smith for her appointment to the Federal Reserve Board Community Advisory Council. We'd like to hear more about your appointment soon, Kendra. Congratulations. And now here to talk to us about another community service project is Community Services Chair Kelly Trame. Kelly?
Thanks, Alex, and hi, Toledo Rotary. I hope everybody had a wonderful holiday. I'm thrilled to share with you the next community service project that we have in store for everybody. You remember all the styrofoam that you've accumulated probably in the past few weeks? Well, this is going to be a great opportunity to be able to get that all recycled because typically our standard recycling centers don't accept it. The Community Service Committee has agreed to partner with Keep Toledo Lucas County Beautiful in hosting 6 different recycling sites throughout Greater Toledo area, and we need your help to sign up. It's been in the Spoke. It went out this morning as well, a reminder with a link to sign up, and it's on our website. We're looking for volunteers to work one of 2 shifts. The shifts are going to be from 9:30 to 11:30 and 11:30 to 1:30. And the dates are January 6, 8, 9, 13, 15, and 16. So take a moment and register. You can get the link again on the website or check your Spoke and check the information that went out this morning from the Rotary office. Thanks. I look forward to seeing everybody at this great community service project. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you also for keeping your committee members engaged. I know I'm already signed up for a couple hours, looking forward to it. Here to provide us with an update of our Foundation annual campaign and challenge is past President Tom Backoff.
Good afternoon, Rotarians. I'm excited today. It's a beautiful day, one of my favorite days in Rotary. You'd come back after the holiday break and the line for the salad bar would be clear back to the coat rack. So we were all off to a great New Year's resolution, starting with salad, and that lasted till maybe the meeting after Martin Luther King Day, and then we were all back to just eating our normal food. But today was a great day, and it's going to be a great meeting today as well, I'm sure. And I miss all of you tremendously, and I know we can't wait to get back when we're meeting in person and we can enjoy that wonderful salad bar and a meal at the Toledo Club. That'll be terrific. But it is a great day, and it's a day to celebrate. And Janina, Murph, Kathy, I could hardly hold your enthusiasm today as you were talking before the meeting. And as Kathy said, our great reveal. I feel like I'm on The Bachelor or something, that we're going to have the great reveal. But you all did a terrific job. And Janina, to answer your question specifically, yes, we met the match. We met the challenge. We had 52% of our club contributed to our annual campaign. So we will receive the $10,000 match from the anonymous donor, and we're excited about that. And as excited as we are, and I don't want to diminish that at all, it really is a tremendous accomplishment, but our goals are two. Number one, we want 100% participation, so we still have 48% to go. So that is one of our goals. Our second goal, of course, was to raise $80,000. We need to raise $80,000 to get us back on track so that we can continue to give $190,000 to $200,000 back into the community at such a time of need. So right now, with our match, we're at about $63,000. We got $17,000 more to go. 84% of our members to participate in the annual campaign. So we're going to be working hard the next 6 months to get that done. But for right now, give yourself a big pat on the back. And again, congratulations, Rotarian. Magnificent job. Thank you. One of the other things that President Alex asked me to do today was to give you an update as to what our club is doing in regards to vaccinations for COVID and our participation with the V Project, which is an initiative that's been started here in Lucas County between the Lucas County Department of Health, Lucas County Commissioners, the Mayor's Office. Everyone's involved. There are a lot of Rotarians involved. You may have heard about it either in the newspaper article in late December, or it's been on the television news as well. It's a large group of people from all over our community, and anyone can participate. So there are 14 subcommittees, and we have an ambitious goal. The goal is to achieve 70% immunization by May the 1st. We have a lot of work to do. There are a lot of questions. We've got a couple of answers, but there's still a lot of information to come out. So let me try and condense this for you and tell you a little bit about what the Rotary Club of Toledo is doing to participate in this. So the Board of Directors has put together an ad hoc committee, and we have met 3 times as a committee to put together how Rotary can lend its expertise to the V Project. As we talked about last month, no one in the world has more experience than Rotary in immunization and vaccination. So we have a lot of expertise that we can lend to this project. So we have reached out to Rotary International. We're working with our district. We're trying to put together a model that not only works in our district and our zone, but maybe something that could be spread throughout the world. So it's an ambitious project. And obviously, we've got wonderful people already, Rotarians. Pat Bowe is leading this V Project initiative along with Sean Savage. Also on the leadership committee are Rotarians Bill Rudolph and Ram Durant. There are Rotarians serving on all these 14 subcommittees. So we are going to be coordinating greatly amongst a lot of us. But the idea is, where can Rotary bring their expertise to the vaccination process? And it's going to take some financial commitment. And how does Rotary Club of Toledo Foundation, working with our partners at the Greater Toledo Community Foundation, how do we support that initiative? So our ad hoc committee will be working closely with our foundation advisory committees, the board and the trustees going forward, so that we do get this close to getting our vaccinations made. So that's our goal. You're going to be hearing more updates, I'm sure, from President Alex, other members of the team. We're extremely excited. We're proud Rotarians, and I can't thank you enough for all of your initiatives, your contributions, your encouragement. It really means a lot going forward. And we can't wait to get you involved and get you updated to let you know that really, I think Lucas County is going to provide a model for how to roll out the vaccine. And I mean that in our country. If you've seen lines of people over the weekend who have gone to vaccination stations in Florida and Tennessee, I can assure you that won't happen here in Lucas County. It will be done in a professional, organized, scientific way. We're going to be producing accurate, reliable information so that we can get the word out, the vaccination is safe, and let people know where to go and when to get vaccinated. We've got great people working on this, and we're so excited. So thank you all. And again, congratulations on hitting our goal and making the match. President Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for leading us as a campaign chair. I'm confident, very confident we'll reach our goal. And I also want to thank you for taking the lead on the V project. It is an aggressive program. And again, there are many companies, many nonprofits. The list is overwhelming. So please join us as we continue to support that effort. And finally, here to introduce today's speaker is past President Walt McGee. Walt?
It's my privilege today to introduce Lou Hebert, who's been a broadcaster in our community for a number of years. You've probably seen him on Channel 24 and perhaps even on Channel 11. Fascinating reading Lou's blog, and I'm going to bring it up here on the screen so you can see. There you go. It's the Toledo Gazette WordPress.com. And one of the things that in reading Lou's writings, and there's two of the books that he's published, Day by Day in Toledo, which is going to be updated, according to Lou, sometime in the coming future. Hidden History of Toledo is available as of the moment. I found both of these listed on Amazon, and they are available. Day by Day may not be available at the moment. Lou will tell you more about that in a second. Anyway, reading the Toledo Gazette, interesting, very interesting. One of the things that you got to admire about Lou is he loves the details. In fact, as I was reading through his blog, reminded me of the rest of the story. That should ring a few bells here on Rotary. Because Lou likes the details. He likes to look at not only the event and the details of the event, but he also likes to look at the consequences of it. Certainly something that those of us who used to listen to the news on ABC radio at noon, and we would catch Paul Harvey. The rest of the story was always interesting by all means. Good write-up in the Spoke about Lou. I encourage you to read that. And with that, I encourage Lou to talk. Lou, take it over.
All right, thank you very much, Walter, and a big compliment about the Paul Harvey. I did have the opportunity to meet Paul, actually to talk with him several times. Never met him person to person, but we actually we talked several times on the telephone when I was first in the business. I was working at an ABC radio station and was able to call him a couple of times with stories. And it was always interesting to me because you would call up his office in Chicago and he would answer the phone. And he always answered the phone with his, Paul Harvey, good day. It was like, I remember the first time I did that, I think the phone was shaking in my hand. But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be here today to talk to everybody. And I love talking about history. As my wife can tell you, I can talk about it for hours and hours. I never get tired of talking about history or reading old newspaper articles and that type of thing. I do have, as mentioned, the Day by Day book, which I'll hold up here if you all can see it. That one of the things that I usually do when I start out a talk like this is to take a look at what happened on this day in history in the Toledo area. And I thought, well, I was going to do that this time around. I said, you know what? I need to do something a little different rather than just, moving around some of the different years and what happened on this day in history. And there were some interesting things, no doubt, that happened. I thought, you know what? I think that maybe I'll just try to take a look at one year, one specific year, and see what happened. And I thought, why not 100 years ago? What happened? What was life like in Toledo 100 years ago this week, the first week of the new year? So much, it seems, has transpired over the last 100 years in the city, but what was it like then? What were people like? What was actually happening and occupying the minds of Toledoans? Well, the first thing we have to do is mention that New Year's Day of 1921 was much different than it was in 1920, because not many people were waking up with hangovers. That's because all the bars and saloons and the liquor stores were all shut down. This was the second full year of Prohibition. The newspapers said that the New Year's Eve celebration was a quiet night in Toledo. The Newsbee said it was really just another Friday night for most folks in the city. Now, there were still a few revelers out in the city on New Year's Eve at the Secor Hotel. It's reported they had a big orchestra that night and a dance and a very nice affair over at the Secor, as they always did on New Year's Eve. This was New Year's Eve of 1920, had a nice dinner of filet mignon and mock turtle soup. Each chair, though, had a reminder pinned to it that the Volstead Act would be enforced, and any man who had something stuffed in his hip pocket, it had best be a handkerchief and not a hip flask full of hooch. Out at the Toledo Yacht Club up at Point Place, Bayview Park, they had a very big dance up there, as they did on New Year's Eve. A lot of people there, hundreds of people. Some guy in the orchestra, however, started a rumor that somebody in the room had a bottle. No one seemed to be able to confirm it. There were lots of people looking for that bottle. My guess is there were probably plenty of trips out to the parking lot at the Toledo Yacht Club as the evening wore on, because while booze might have been outlawed, a lot of people were still imbibing. As you well know, the Detroit, Windsor, Toledo booze conveyor was in full swing by 1921. Thousands of gallons were heading down the Detroit River from all the breweries and the distilleries that were still open in Canada. And eventually gallons by the thousands of gallons eventually made their way into Point Place and Toledo and other parts of the region. The obvious confluence of American thirst and American enterprise. But for the most part, police say there were only about a dozen arrests New Year's Eve of 1920 going into 21. Dozen arrests for drunk and disorderly. They say usually there were about 50 or 60 arrests on a given New Year's Eve. So it was overall a relatively quiet night. Now, the first baby of the new year, 1921, was Lawrence Jameson, 12.5 pounds, and born at the East Side Hospital on Star Avenue. This young infant was a living reminder that the new year was in its infancy and nobody was quite sure what it would bring in its maturity. Now, the old year wasn't the best, by the way. 1920 did see an economic downturn in the city. The Great War was over, and of course there was some good news in that the Spanish influenza was starting to wind itself down and people were getting well again. But there was still an economic downturn in 1920 that carried over a bit into 1921. A lot of people out of work. Mayor Cornell Schreiber said there were about 25,000 people out of work looking for work that didn't exist. Now, the interesting thing about 1921 is that even though there was an economic downturn, Toledo was still on the move forward. Toledo was a progressive city, and there were lots of things happening here. And so the forecast was for another 15,000 people to move into the Glass City. And for those who did, they would find the price of a home here was anywhere from about $2,000 to $3,000, depending on the neighborhood you were going to move into, up to about $10,000. There was also hope that this year was going to be a good year at Ohio State. Football fans were hopeful on that first day of the year to glean a little cheer on New Year's Day for the big Rose Bowl game at Pasadena, but not so much. It looks like the Buckeyes took it on the chin from California that year. Crime was a problem. That was carried over from 1920 to 21. In 1920, there were 27 homicides in Toledo in the year. The last victim of the year was a woman by the name of Annie Mackel. She was shot and killed by a fellow by the name of Bruno Heydrich over on Bush Street. That happened on New Year's Eve. And then he turned the gun on himself. Could have been an unrequited love turned tragic. Nobody knows for sure. It was ironic that both of them ended up in the same funeral home over the weekend in opposite rooms. Not many people came to see Bruno. It was said he was not a likable chap. Annie Mackel, however, was very popular with many. So the neighbors and, according to the papers, the morbidly curious all came out to see her in her white gown lying inside of her white casket. Her ex-husband didn't show up, though. He was a former cop, Eddie Mackel. He didn't show up, not even for the graveside service at Calvary Cemetery. So we don't know exactly what happened there, but I'm sure there's a story. Some things never change. Lots of stories, especially when it comes to crime, always are many times involving young guys with too much time and too much testosterone. And there's always the irony, you know. The Happy Land pool room over on Canton Avenue had a shooting there on New Year's Day. Proprietor Charlie Davis told the troublemaker to get out of the pool room. The troublemaker didn't, so Charlie pulled a revolver and used it. The troublemaker did leave, feet first in a hearse. On Thursday, January 6th, there was quite a bit of drama in downtown Toledo 100 years ago this week. It was the passing of a stolen check at a store on Madison Avenue downtown, resulted in quite a dramatic police chase and shooting that left 2 people dead. Now, the check passer was a guy by the name of George Butler, and he was shot down by a Toledo policeman by the name of James King. Now, King actually shot him out. He commandeered a car on Erie Street and started shooting at him from a running car and shot Butler in the neck and killed him. Before Butler had died, though, he had shot a good Samaritan who had tried to intervene, a Mr. Kincaid, but Mr. Kincaid also was mortally wounded and died a couple of days later. The policeman, by the way, James King, turns out was very well known to the kids over at Detroit and Central, where he was the morning traffic cop in the school guard crossing at Glenwood School. And they said he was going to be a big hero when classes resumed after the holiday. Over at the county jail that week, Clara Miller was starting her 12th year as the jail matron for the women prisoners behind bars. A Newsbee article that week featured her story, said she had personally counseled more than 5,000 women at the jail during her 12 years there. Clara, they said, had cured 1,200 drug addicts and set straight a lot of high-class female crooks and some shoplifters and some foolish girls and even a few murderesses, all for the whopping salary of $50 a month. Clara, it said, spent many a night trying to cheer up a heartsick girl who was going to go on trial the next day. So many girls who learned life's bitter lessons from Clara and was counseled by Mrs. Miller since became law-abiding mothers and wives and named their girls Clara as a tribute to this wonderful woman who helped them through a bad patch in life. Now, one of the big concerns the public was having this first week of 1921, 100 years ago, was making sure that when people danced in public places and dance halls, they kept it decent. No cheek-to-cheek dancing. Keep your distance, be civil. And guess what? Toledo Police even hired a policewoman, Mary Shaw, with that express purpose, whose job it was to chaperone dances and keep young men and women from being a little too familiar with each other and to keep it decent. Mary said it was shocking and vulgar as to how these young people behaved. Told the newspaper reporters that one woman wore a skirt recently that was above her knee. Not just above her knee, but halfway to her hip. She said, well, even the men were disgusted and told her to leave. Then if that wasn't scandalous enough, Mary said some women were going to the restroom and taking their corsets off to dance, or some of their undergarments to do the toddle and the shimmy, so they get a little more action under their clothes. City Council, it said, was going to hold hearings on the matter later this month. Now, if a couple just wanted to go to the movies and didn't want to go dancing, they had a lot of choices in the city in 1921 in January. 12 theaters. Now remember, still silent films didn't have talkies until late 20s. Some were live, and they had some with movies. There were some with a mix. There was the Pantheon, the Rivoli, and the Valentine. You probably remember those. The Valentine, of course, is still with us, and it's where the Toledo History Museum is located, in that building as well. There was the Empress, the Temple, the Keith. That was a vaudeville theater, and the Alhambra, to name just a few. And of course, if you went to the movies, all the ladies wanted to see the big heartthrob of the day, Rudolph Valentino. Now, for the well-dressed who wanted to go out on the town, they still had the department stores to choose from to get some fashionable items. Tidke's, Lyons, and LaSalle's were all featuring big New Year's sales that week. Now, Tidke's for the Med had men's union suit underwear for $1.98. LaSalle was featuring fur hats for the ladies made of moleskin and muskrat for $5. And coats that were made of raccoon, or you could find them with Australian possum or Bering seal fur for just $39.75. LaSalle's, it seemed, had another big problem on the 4th of January, 100 years ago today, in fact. LaSalle's. Out on Huron Street, a small near riot developed out in front of the store when a woman who had gone in shopping left her sleeping baby in the buggy on the sidewalk. And while she went in to shop, the baby woke up, started to cry and scream. Well, that caused passerbys and 3 policemen to stop and try to get the baby to stop crying. And they couldn't figure out, well, did somebody just abandon this child? And thinking that, well, maybe that was the case, police called for a paddy wagon to pick him up. But then mom came out, she started screaming, set off a righteous riot, according to the paper, screaming at everybody assembled to leave her child alone, pointing her shaking finger at everybody, saying, shame on you for teasing a baby that way. She told everybody to back off, and they did. Eventually just walked down the sidewalk on their own way and went back to what they were doing. Policemen, it said, made some snide remarks and kept walking down the street. That's the way it was this week. Oh, by the way, this week in 1921, 100 years ago, was the week that the city crews re-engineered Swan Creek, rerouted it through a man-made channel to allow for an extension of Summit Street so it would connect with Broadway. It didn't connect at one time. Hundreds of people lined up to witness this momentous event, this occasion, this rechanneling of Swan Creek, so they would move it so they could They could extend Summit Street so it would finally connect with South Toledo. One of the contractors even christened it with a bottle of wine. It said the wine and the shards of the glass spilled into Swan Creek. Don't know if it affected the fish there. But there was a big story about fishing in New York, but it involved the Toledo area. You see, it seems goldfish were becoming the new delicacy on the plates of the fashionable eateries of New York. And the source of the goldfish, Port Clinton and Western Lake Erie. Fishermen had been making huge hauls of goldfish and sending rail cars filled with the big goldfish to the Big Apple. They called them wild goldfish. Some weighed even a half pound. Now they were believed, and this was the theory anyway, because nobody was quite sure where they came from. They were believed to be hybrids that were created when millions of goldfish escaped from a pond up at Detroit's Belle Isle a few years before. And the fish, it said, probably made their way down the Detroit River into the lake, mated with larger carp, and then found their way into the shallows on the southern edge of the lake. And Portage River seemed to be the spawning ground. And that's where the fishermen were taking out fish by the tons and sending them up by the carload to New York. Fishing's been on the mind of some Toledoans this week in 1921 as the weather reached into the high 40s and 50s. Children were out in the streets without coats, enjoying a false sense of spring. The warm weather spawned some thick fog out on the lake. The small mail boats who deliver the mail out to the islands had been caught up in it. One mail boat and two of the young brave mail carriers got lost. For 7 hours, they wandered around in the thick pea soup fog, trying to find their way to Put-in Bay and Kelly's Island, but they were eventually found and they're home safe. The nice weather at least had everybody hopeful about the coming year. And one of the big hopes for the Mud Hens that year was that first week of January, it was revealed that Mud Hens owner Roger Bresnahan had come up with $1,500 to buy the famous Olympian Jim Thorpe from Akron, from the Akron ball team. Now, Bresnahan had hopes that Thorpe, with his marquee appeal, could put some spark in the team and put a little spark into ticket sales with his popular appeal and his Olympian reputation. So what did 1921 finally bring? Well, in February, a gang of armed men held up the U.S. Post Office at 14th and Madison, right next to the current, where the Toledo Club is, in fact, right across the street. Over $1 million in securities and cash and bonds were taken. It was the biggest robbery in Toledo history at the U.S. Post Office. The Urbitis gang responsible for that, Joe and Frank and sister Wanda, and a cast of about 18 people eventually arrested, including a former priest from St. Hedwig's, who they say was enlisted to help to launder it through the church. Apparently he and Wanda had some sort of relationship that was rather interesting. They were all arrested and some turned state's evidence, most convicted, and some escaped from the porous Lucas County jail, including Joe Urbitis himself. Joe wasn't caught until 3 years later down in Columbus, had a big shootout with Columbus police. He was wounded, policeman was wounded. He eventually made it back to Toledo, and that trial became probably one of the biggest trials over at federal court in the legacy of crime and punishment. And there was quite a legacy of crime and punishment in 1921 when it was all over. There would be 47 murders that year. Tragically, 7 of them were policemen, 5 city officers, and 2 railroad detectives who were shot to death in January, holding about $12,000 that was stolen from them as passenger ticket receipts. There was a crime wave in the city that year. Part of the problem was the crooks had better and faster cars than the cops. So, well, TPD, the police department, in an effort to embarrass the city council into getting them the money to buy better cars, actually had a show where they lined up their old flivvers and their rattle traps to show the public what they had to deal with. They had to deal with cars that wouldn't do over 30 miles an hour when a lot of the crooks were driving cars that would go 50 and 60 or more. So they humiliated the city council well enough that they got the money for 6 brand new cars and 15 motorcycles in 1921. By the way, crime got to be so bad in the city of Toledo that the city council passed an ordinance to rid the city of all known crooks, burglars, pickpockets, thieves, and swindlers. Anybody with a reputation for these activities would be forced to leave the city limits. They didn't have to be convicted. They just had to have a reputation, deserved or undeserved. And if you didn't leave, you were going to go to the workhouse for up to 3 months. It was a bold exercise in crime prevention. Arrest them before they even think about breaking the law. We don't know if it passed constitutional rigor. In the end, it was all for naught because 1921 was a pretty violent year. And it was also a year that Prohibition kept the moonshiners and the rum runners busy trying to make their money by illegally selling the booze and keeping the dry agents and police busy trying to catch them. And they did. Seems every week or so they would bust another still or an illegal brewery, and even busted a couple of stills that were set up in cemeteries over in East Toledo, we hear. It wasn't just booze. Drugs were a big problem in 1921. Kind of hard to believe. We don't think about that sometimes. 100 years ago this week in Toledo, a fellow by the name of Benny Shinbach, known as Fat Benny Shinbach, was caught with what police say was $28,000 worth of cocaine and morphine in a suitcase over at 21st and Monroe. That would have been a lot of drugs back in those days. In politics, Warren Harding of Ohio in 1921 would take his seat in the Oval Office as President of the United States. By the way, Harding was quite well known to the folks here in Toledo. He was from Marion, so not all that far away. He had a following here. A lot of people liked Harding. He had a following so much that he got a new dog, an Airedale Terrier, given to him his first week in office by Caswell Kennels of Toledo, owned by the Quesky family. The dog's name was Laddie Boy. Now, what was interesting about Laddie Boy is Laddie Boy was a beautiful Airedale, considered to be the first White House dog. Now, there have been other dogs before, but Laddie Boy was sort of the first White House dog, the first dog, the first dog, if you will. He became extremely popular. The reporters would interview Laddie Boy, and they would do all kinds of, the kids loved to follow the adventures of Laddie Boy in the newspapers. He became extremely popular, probably more popular than Harding himself. Had a bad heat wave in July of 1921. A lot of people affected. Every few days, somebody was dropping over dead from heat prostration. A lemonade seller in downtown Toledo said he was selling glasses of the cool drink by the thousands. Heat was so bad, it also caused tempers to flare over at Highland Park Pool. A riot erupted between rival youth gangs. Electric streetcars would go into service in February of 1921 as the new Community Traction Company would take over and run that operation till 1949. That's when all those old electric trolleys finally went off the street, and we went to the yellow and green buses. I'm sure some of you might remember, which of course by the 1970s became TARDA. In 1921, radio was just starting to be talked about. Detroit had a station, later to become WWJ. Toledo did not yet. So newspapers were still the dominant news media here, the Blade, the Times, and the Newsbee. Interesting to note that whenever big sports or news events were taking place, hundreds of men and women would crowd around the Newsbee offices or the Blade office to read the latest breaking news postings. They'd take the newspapers out and post them so people could actually read the latest breaking news out on the street. Our first breaking news was done that way. In 1921, it seemed the future was arriving suddenly. With radio, the world speeded up, then eventually became television, and information and ideas became immediate and widespread. And then cars and highways sped up our transportation, giving us refuge and a freedom we never had before in many different ways. Talking movies would also enter the culture of modern life. Indoor plumbing and electricity in the rural areas. The 1920s would change all of that, would start to usher in this brand new era of modernism that we still live in today. It was an awakening really that never stopped. And 1921 is sort of where it started. In Toledo, the die was cast for the future. Much of what we now know as Toledo was starting to germinate to new heights. The glass industry was, of course, here at that point. It was huge. Libby and Ford and Owens, and there was Overland cars that would become eventually Willys and Jeep. There were all the other auto companies, the spin-off Champion Sparkplug would be synonymous with Toledo, Dana, Doler, DeVilbiss, and Autolite. And of course, we had the shipping industry. That was a fact of life here. That predated almost everything. And the steel mills were here and hummed, and the refineries cracked out gasolines and oils, and the main railroads of the nations all crossed the Maumee, connecting east and west. We were a vibrant city even by 1921. And with all of that vibrancy and heavy industry and the sweat and the labor and the toil, of course, came a robust labor movement. Seeds planted here grew. And by 1921, Toledo was a growing city. It was growing, as I like to say, like a hungry stalk of corn on a dewy July night. So what does all this mean besides a curiosity factor? Here's the thing. The lesson of history is, for me, is that it seems the more I read about the past, it seems the worlds of our past and our present are remarkably the same and remarkably different sometimes. It's kind of like looking at a childhood picture of adults you may know, even yourself. If you look close enough, you'll see the same eyes. You'll recognize the same twist of a lip or the tilt of the shape of a head. Different, but parts of it are the same. And as Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And this week, 100 years ago in Toledo, you could hear that rhyme loud and clear. Thank you.
Lou, thank you so much. Incredible presentation. Several comments in the chat speak to your ability to be an incredible storyteller. And obviously, folks in Toledo know that from your career in news. Certainly, I was a big fan of working with you throughout your time at Channel 11 and appreciated the mentorship that you provided to folks at 24 as well during your time there. So at this time, I'll open it up for questions for folks in the club that would like to ask Mr. Hebert a question. You can raise your hand either through the participant tab or again, you can roll the dice and physically raise your hand and hope to God that I see you. I can't promise that'll work. I guess we'll just, let me kind of, all right, I think I saw a hand go up. All right, Mr. Epstein, you are up. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, Lou. Dick Epstein here.
Hi, Dick.
Hi. I'm a fountain pen lover, and I had to leave for a minute. I didn't hear your whole presentation, but I have a Conklin fountain pen here from 1920. This is an actual pen that was used in 1920 in Toledo. Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about Conklin Fountain Pen Company?
Probably you can tell us more, but I'm familiar enough to know that they were one of the leading fountain pen companies in the country, and were based here in Toledo. Were they at the Spitzer building, if I recall, Dick?
Well, I think they had their own building downtown, and okay. Roy Conklin invented the modern fountain pen in 1898. Yeah. Because Mark Twain did ads for these pens because he called it the no profanity pen because it didn't roll off his table because of the little flange on the side of it here, and he did advertising for it. So it was an amazing part of Toledo history. Yeah, there are a number of small companies like that were here. Many of them gone now. Some are still around, but for the most part, yeah, there were a lot of small companies here. And I just read something recently on an early car company, steam car company here called the Toledo Steam, which was not around a long time, but it was in the era of the steam automobile. And the Toledo Steam was actually the first automobile to actually make it to the Grand Canyon, and was able to
to make it to the rim of the southern rim of the Grand Canyon. And that feat by a pair of brothers from England who owned a Toledo Steam, they actually recreated that just a few years ago. Took their Toledo Steam, had it shipped to Arizona, and drove their Toledo Steam all the way to the rim of the Grand Canyon. But it's, I would love to see an old Toledo Steam. I know there are some Milburns around, but I don't know about a Toledo Steam here in the city. Any other
Excellent.
questions?
All right. Next question is coming from Kelly Train. Kelly, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Lou, it's good to talk to you. So great to hear you talk today and share all your knowledge. What I was wondering is, in the 1920s, what were the boundaries of Toledo, like the street boundaries and other towns right outside of Toledo that may have been annexed as Toledo continued to grow?
Well, as best I can tell you is I know I think if you go west, if you go out to like where Toledo Hospital is, you're pretty much at the city limits on the west in the 1920s. And to the north, you're probably looking at Manhattan and that area. Some of those areas up there had not been annexed. They were still Washington Township. There was Adams Township, I know, was around. That was annexed later. There, of course, Oregon, that was still a township, as was Northwood. It was not really a part of, and of course, they became their own cities eventually. Oregon, surprisingly, not until I think 1959 or 60, before it became its own town. But Ottawa Hills was somewhere around 100 years ago, I believe, when it was formed, and I think that's the case. I'll have to look up the exact date, but it was somewhere in that era. So Toledo was really growing, and as it kept pushing westward, especially, that's when we started seeing, the move out of the old West End into Westmoreland, for example, became the new place where the money went to, and then of course to Ottawa Hills. So it's fascinating when you really think about how even the Trilby area, and that was its own enclave out there, its own community. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting stories of growth here, and how the city evolved. And even downtown, how many people lived in the downtown area that this was, well, if you see behind me, this picture is actually a picture of, somebody asked me earlier, let me get out of the way here. You see this building right here that I'm pointing to up here, that's the Booty House. I'm quite sure that was the Booty House. So that was at Madison and St. Clair Street. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the Booty House there, the Booty House Hotel. Any other
All right,
questions?
next question is coming from John Wasserman. John?
Sure.
You can go ahead.
Lou, absolutely great presentation. The Purple Gang, were they infiltrating and operating out of Detroit around 1921? I was wondering what their involvement was at that time. Ballet and that gang.
My understanding was the Purple Gang, which actually started in St. Louis. They were really the at least Licavoli's Purple Gang. There were a couple of Purple Gangs. There was the original Purple Gang in Detroit, which was a totally different group of guys. They were more of paid hitmen than they were anything else, than bootleggers. But there was Licavoli's group was called the River Gang, and they were out of St. Louis, and eventually moved into Detroit to try to get into the rum running and the prohibition racket, and then eventually moved down to Toledo by the late 20s. And of course, that's what started the war down here. Really, was when the Licavolis came in and tried to upend all of the local folks that were really, whether it was Jack Kennedy and a few others who had their own little business and going down here in prohibition and rum running. So that's what created the conflict. And of course, we all know what happened eventually is Mr. Licaboli found himself in prison, and Mr. Kennedy and a few other, well, actually it was a very bloody period too. It was, we started those wars, those violent wars started probably in the mid-20s, even before Licaboli got here, because there was such a power struggle. Capone was still trying to move into the Detroit area and move into the Toledo area as well. So yeah, that's, there are some great books that have been written on, in fact, I'll mention, if anybody's interested in learning more about Prohibition, this one's just out. I did not do this. This is Joe Boggs, who's actually a history teacher over at Penna Career Center, just published this. It's called Prohibition's Proving Ground, and it really goes into some of the history, a lot of detailed history about how, you know, how the different forces lined up during Prohibition between, especially that Detroit, Windsor, Toledo connection. And, you know, a lot of people don't realize that Canada didn't really outlaw, the making of whiskey and beer for a number of years. And you had Walkerville up at Wisconsin that was actively producing, at the Hiram Walker, a distillery, actively producing a lot of booze. And but they weren't allowed to sell it in the United States. They were allowed to export it to other countries outside of the US, but we all know how that works sometimes. It found its way down here. So.
Excellent. All right, Lou, thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation today. Just got a note in the chat that Danny Woodcock, one of our members, actually, the Purple Gang, came up and did a podcast on the Purple Gang for folks that may be interested in that.
Oh, good.
So thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to pass it back to President Alex at this time.
Thank you.
Lou, thank you for that interesting and enlightening presentation and for joining us today.
Sure.
As our gift to you, we'll be sending you a well-known book in Toledo, Historical Tales of Toledo, authored by Rotary past president Clint Mock.
Right.
Well, that is provided that you don't already have a copy.
I don't have a copy, so I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, fantastic, great. We'll also make a donation to the Polio Plus Fund in your name. So thanks again for joining us. And now, here to send us off with a Monday afternoon laugh is past President Chuck Mann, Chuck's Chuckles. Chuck?
Inspired by all the stories that Lou has told about people in bars, I thought we'd start the New Year's off with a few walk into a bar jokes. A polar bear walks into a bar and says to the bartender, "I'll have a gin and tonic." The bartender asks, "Why the big pause?" The polar bear replies, "I don't know, I've always had them." Give a man a duck and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to duck and he'll never walk into a bar. And finally, some Texans are mingling at the bar when an Oxford graduate walks in. "Howdy, stranger," one Texan says. "Where are you from?" The Oxford graduate answers, "I come from a place where we do not end our sentences in propositions." "Oh, I'm sorry," replied the Texan. "Where are you from, jackass?" And that's the end of Mike. Yeah. Over to you, President Alex.
Oh, thank you, Chuck. Thank you very much. Got me laughing on a Monday afternoon anyway. All right, so our next meeting, January 11th, next week, our very own Rotarian Tim Harrington on the 100th anniversary of the Ability Center. Looking forward to that presentation. We have two meetings today after this meeting. Community services and vocational services, please stay on the Zoom link and you'll be placed in breakout rooms. The Water Services Committee will meet tomorrow morning, Tuesday, at 9 a.m. So January 5th at 9 a.m. So that is it for us today. Again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Lou, for a fantastic presentation. Have a great week, everybody. We're adjourned.